Hey everyone, I hope you're all well. I thought I'd take a moment to record a video about your second assignment for HSP404, the Critical Literature Review. As per usual, and as is my custom, I have some crappy little graphics on the front slide in this presentation. We've got a massive pile of books and then a little diagram that represents the 7 steps to doing a literature review. Now, I'm not sure I could entirely agree with the different steps, but it does the job. The pile of books is significant. You will need to do a lot of reading for this piece of work, and often well beyond the 10 required sources. So you'll need to sort of become a mini expert on the topic that you're reading about. So if you're reading about sexual harassment in police services, then you're going to need to go and read the research literature about that, and then perhaps a few inquiry documents that have been done in police services that have focused on sexual harassment, obviously. So these are the types of things that you'll need to think about for this assessment. It is not something you can do the night before. It will require a lot of time and effort and thought. So this assignment is due at the end of week 7. On Friday by midnight. It needs to be uploaded on the Milo site. The specific due date is on the Milo site for you as well, in case you need it. It's a 2,000 word limit that excludes your reference list, and it's weighted at 30%. So this is the topic. You need to write a critical literature review of the relevant literature as it applies to your chosen topic. At least 10 articles chapters must be chosen in consultation with your academic advisor. The lit review must be properly referenced, blah, blah, blah. And I've said here you will need a substantial amount of independent research for this. So you'll need to sit down at the computer and go through the databases, have a look at book chapters, see what you can find in Google Scholar, all of that sort of stuff. A critical analysis of research literature is underpinned by reading across sources, and as many as you can on one topic, right? You don't have to go like way back into the 60s and 50s, but at least in the last 10 years is what is expected. And then you need to be able to report on the key themes. So you've got your pile of literature that you've printed out for it, sorted into piles according to what they talk about. This person talks about the impact of sexual harassment in the workplace in terms of PTSD. This one talks about how it's managed in the workplace. This one talks about something else. Sort them into themes. That is critical analysis, is thinking across all of those sources. You then need to synthesize your sources in terms of key themes rather than describing each source individually. That's a very different task. You will need to find them, etc., through the Google and through the databases and so forth. I have some general tips. You can most certainly use the third person for this, and it's the preferred rather than first person. A useful way to think about creating a critical academic argument in the literature review is to showcase the gaps in the knowledge base. You're saying this is what we know, this is what is missing, and this is why we need to do more research to fill the gaps. So you can create a vertical thread in your work if you set up that argument at the start and then you finish it at the end. This clearly shows that we have a dearth of research on sexual harassment in these workplaces, okay, if that makes sense. Think carefully also about how you can structure your review according to major themes. Avoid describing the themes, as I've noted on the previous slide. And make sure you include at least one reference per paragraph. In fact, I would argue you're not doing the job of the literature review unless you have more than one source per paragraph. Why? Because you need to think across them. So if Smith and Taylor are talking about something similar, the fact that sexual harassment in the workplace leads to PTSD, then you need to talk about them together. Smith says this. However, Taylor talks about this. Agrees with Smith in this way, but it's a little bit different in this way. That's demonstrating synthesis across the different sources rather than talking about Smith says this, they did this. Taylor says this, they did that. If you only do those things, it's descriptive, not a critical analysis. It's absolutely imperative that you read across the sources. So you'll be looking at least a few sources per paragraph. You will have some instances where there is only one paper that talks about that specific topic, and you can talk about that in a paragraph as well when you're outlining their work. Some other tips, it's about thinking of the steps, right? Determine what has been written on a specific topic. Provide an overview of your key concepts. I would argue that it's a good idea to do that in the introduction. Have a look at the major relationships or patterns. One of the things that I like to do is actually have a piece of paper in front of me and draw a concept map. Okay, sexual harassment in the workplace, as linked to PTSD, as linked to stress, how it's managed in the workplace. And you have your research literature coming off that central topic in the middle that you've got there. You can identify strengths and weaknesses, although that's not necessarily a major focus. But you do need to identify any gaps in the research, and your discussion should do that. Identify any conflicting evidence. So Smith talks about this over here, as does white, as does blue, as does red, right? All of those can be grouped into one. However, Taylor does something completely different and in fact found completely different results. That's totally okay. You can do that. And of course, provide a solid background to a research paper's investigation. I'll get there eventually. So that's, just some little tips or steps to think about when you're doing this particular task. As per usual, I love structure, so I'm giving you a suggested structure for this particular task. We've got the basic, straightforward, usual structure that we would follow in any other essay. But for a lit review, think about having your introduction, obviously, and a roadmap of your key points, and then some background. Why this topic now? It's kind of like a rationale, I suppose. About 200 words for that one. Then we've got a rather long section about the critical analysis of the research literature, 1,600 words. This is where you analyse your research literature. How you structure this will depend on your focus. The best way to organise it is in terms of key themes, reading across. I've given you an example there. Make sure that you synthesise it within your paragraph in a section. Okay, so you might have your section on PTSD and sexual harassment, and then there might be 2 themes within that specific section, if that makes sense. So you have 2 paragraphs. Then you have a conclusion that summarises your main points and talks about, clearly this shows that there's a dearth of research on blah, 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 and why we need to do this research. And then we list our references. So you need to shape this task with your academic advisor. Make sure they are the ones that you're speaking to about what research do I need to look at, okay? They might be able to give you some suggestions to start off with, and then you can branch off from there. Oftentimes you'll find maybe 1 or 2 articles is enough to really get you going, because those 2 articles have a whole list of about 20, sometimes even 30 references in the back that you can go and find in the databases and have a read of, and then it spans from there. So if you can get your academic advisor to do that for you in terms of this particular task, that will be really, really helpful. You can also discuss with them about how to structure this task in terms of the different themes and things that you might be discussing in it. So this is where I would normally give you some feedback that students have had in the past on this task. But as you know, you're all a bunch of guinea pigs. I mean that in the nicest way. For this particular unit, because we've got new assessment and it's all very exciting and cool. So what we do need you to do is tell us if it is a good idea to do this research literature review in future, or whether or not you think it's a load of bollocks, because we'll base what we do in future on your feedback. All right, so make sure you let us know at the end of the semester with the evaluate surveys and all of that sort of stuff. So moving past the happy guinea pig, what does the marking rubric say? We've clearly got here, conduct a critical analysis of relevant scholarly literature, etc., etc. So we've got relevance and authority of the literature, and then we've got a section on critical analysis where it talks about making sure that you've got a consistent academic argument that points out the gaps in existing knowledge. A high level of integration and synthesis, which is where we're reading across the sources, we're drawing them together. We're not saying Smith talks about blah, Taylor talks about blah, Red talks about blah, then nothing. That's description, not critical analysis. Synthesis is what brings your sources together, so you've got critical analysis. And of course, a clear, detailed analysis of key themes in the literature reviewed. Then we've got critically reflecting on and communicating the contextual theory and discipline knowledge. This is where you're looking at the application of the research to the topic. Focus on your research topic is well focused, and developed in depth and with detailed and relevant authoritative knowledge. Sorry, folks, I'm a bit tired this morning. It's hard to get words out of my head. So making sure that you've got a nice tight focus and that your points are quite specific. And as per usual, we've got the section that talks about academic writing, clear and concise introduction to the topic, making sure you've got all the points of the lit review there, clear conclusions, grammar and spelling accurate, all of that sort of stuff. Assignment formatted appropriately with clear paragraphing. So just considering all of those types of things. Now, I've given you some example paragraphs, but because we haven't done this assignment before, we don't have any student examples. So I'm using some examples from a lit review that I have published quite a while ago. It just gives you a sense of the type of writing that we're expecting for this assessment item. So you can see here a nice clear block paragraph in the introduction in particular, talking through some of the major issues. So this would be the first part of your introduction where you are starting things up. Yours is going to be much smaller than this. So this actually might be sort of half of your introduction for the start of it, because you also need the other half of your introduction to focus on what you're actually doing. So in this paper, I developed that in a lot of detail because I needed to do that for the journal. But you probably want half your paragraph to be focused on your roadmap, which is this paragraph here that we've got on the next slide. This article interrogates, blah, blah, blah. First, it briefly considers. Second, the article examines. Third, it explores international research. Fourth, discussion moves to. Finally, the article concludes. So clear sign posting about what you're going to discuss, all right? It's very important. So half sort of talking about the general topic, half road mapping out the different things that you're going to be discussing. Then I've just got a basic section paragraph. If you've got a lot of detailed information that you need to overview, sometimes you can include some dot points and you can see the clear links to statistics and so forth. I've also, though, got another section paragraph that just talks about a specific overarching topic. So young people from diverse and marginalised backgrounds are especially subject to policing measures seeking to regulate public spaces. And then I put together all of the research literature. And you can see that I've thought across the different sources. All of those sources say the same thing: Hagen et al., McGarra, McVie, and Wilson, etc. And then there's specific ones that I'm talking through in that paragraph. This is despite an ever-burgeoning literature about youth victimisation. So you can clearly see that paragraph structure that you'll learn about when you look at how to write an essay and how to write a literature review. And then I've got an example conclusion. This article suggests it's necessary to further research on these issues, etc., etc., and it talks about how to do that. You'll need to provide a summary of your key points in your conclusion as well. This actually went across a few different paragraphs in mine, so I didn't include it. I've given you one example here that shows how to do that in a little bit more detail. You know, it highlights the need to move forward in a particular area, all of those types of things. Anyway, on that note, I hope that was helpful. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch with any of us at any time. I hope to chat to you very soon. See ya!